I'd like to offer a prayer just before we begin.
Awesome. Yes, please.
May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all of our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Well, Scott had an opportunity to welcome you already, but I would like to second that word of welcome. Welcome, Allison and Gerald.
Thank you.
Allison and Gerald are very well-known leaders in our Advent Cafe community, and Allison, you've been a preaching voice in our Advent Cafe community a number of times in some of our preaching series. But for those of you out in our congregation, our virtual congregation tonight, who don't know Allison and Gerald as well, or who don't know them outside of our Advent Cafe community, I'm wondering whether you could just start by sharing a little bit with all of us about your music ministry.
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having us as part of the conversation. I'm very excited about this.
It's lovely just to be even though we're social distancing right now, but to be in a room and talking to people, and I know everybody feels that way too.
Yeah.
It's just,
Keeping it real.
Yeah.
It is,
So
truly.
Gerald and I are, we are married, which is why we are not social distancing, just for anyone who's just tuning in. And we are a full-time freelance music ministry. So I say freelance because we're not officially associated, say, with any particular church or denomination. We are a ministry that travels across the country. We go to every single province every year, and we perform over 100 events a year, which could be worship services or concerts or teaching workshops. And our goal is really just to go to every part of this country, anywhere that will let us, and sing about God's love. And we do a lot of things in Anglican churches, because that's my background, and that's kind of where we started, and we have a real heart for that. But we also have a heart for crossing denominational lines and really encouraging others to do the same. So that one of our favorite things is to do a concert in a church, and it might be in the United Church, but the Pentecostal youth group is doing the reception, and the Roman Catholic ladies sold the tickets, or and it's just seeing people come together and realizing how much more we have in common with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that, being able to be in churches that, might seat, thousands of people too, but some of the most beautiful experiences we've had are, we've gone into churches that seat 20 or 30 people that are 150 years old, and you can close your eyes and you can imagine those people kneeling in the pews. You can imagine them dealing with the daily struggles and their joys and people getting married there, and you feel the weight and the power, just like you do here, right?
Yep.
This incredible church here you can almost see them and hear the laughter and
We like
that.
to call it a thin space at St. George's, and that veil between this world and the next just suddenly seems paper thin, and you can feel that cloud of witnesses that transcends time and place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I know that you could fill in a lot of details on what that music ministry looks like and where it takes you, and the people that you get to meet along the way. But I'd like to lead us into kind of the different connections that we're trying to make in these interviews over the next couple of weeks. We have these amazing Easter gospel passages. This gospel passage that we heard tonight is for the 5th Sunday of Easter, which will be this coming Sunday. We've had a number of the actual resurrection stories of Jesus, and we enter into these gospel passages believing that that God is going to speak into our actual lives in the here and now through these words. So in this passage tonight that we just heard, this actually takes us right before Jesus' death. So over the past couple of Sundays, we've been looking at the Easter stories, but this takes us into that night before Jesus dies.
Mm-hmm.
It takes us into just hours before his arrest and his trial. And so you can feel how much uncertainty is present for that group of people who are joining with Jesus at that Last Supper on this really dark and foreboding night. You can hear that uncertainty. Now, there's a lot of places of certainty that Jesus gives us as well, but I want to focus for a moment on that uncertainty, because as we can hear, some of Jesus' closest friends are just peppering him with questions.
Mm-hmm.
They want him to reassure them that the plan is going to go forward the way that they want it to. And Jesus doesn't give them any of the assurance that they're looking for, because we know that in terms of the disciples' perspective, things are about to go off the rails in a total and complete way. This is not what they signed up for. They didn't sign up for following a person who is going to die as a criminal of the state. I feel like that emotional landscape of tonight's reading gives us lots to connect to, right? Because our world it kind of feels like it's gone off the rails in a pretty significant way. We all know about the giant interruption to all of the plans of our lives. We're all in a landscape that we didn't think that we signed up for. And, I think we continue to be filled with way more questions than answers. I've been really struck. I listen to the radio. I'm more of a radio person than television. And I love hearing on the radio actual stories of actual people. Like, you have the news reports and stuff, but then where actual people being affected in particular ways by the circumstances that we're all living through right now. And I've been really struck by some of the stories of artists and performers and musicians right now. And I'm so grateful that both of you have been so kind of honest and forthright about how your music ministry has been impacted and your lives and livelihoods have been impacted by what we're going through right now. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, we're a couple of days into May, like, what would you normally be doing right now? And then what has the impact of this mass interruption had on you?
It's interesting because almost every day now we're getting sent photos by Facebook from last year and from other years. Like last week we were at the East Coast Music Awards, and which was an incredible evening and all of that stuff. But just this would have been our 10th annual tour of the East Coast.
Oh gosh.
And yeah, I mean the whole country is such an incredibly special place. We feel so blessed to be from Canada, and we love going coast to coast. But we're kind of from the East Coast, right? Our hearts are kind of East Coasty, and so it's
On the East Coast.
yeah, so it's. That feels like it's interrupting kind of the friends and family aspect of a lot of what we do right now.
Well, and I'd also say too, just so people have a good picture of it, this tour should have been 2 months long.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a few days if it was interrupted.
Right.
Every year we go east.
9 or 10 weeks, yeah.
Yeah, this would have been our 10th year, as Gerald said. So
Yeah.
it was going to be a real there's going to be a real celebration tour. And, you know, we would have left home just after Easter, and we would have gone to all the provinces. We had worship services planned and concerts, and we were planning like extra celebrations because it's the anniversary. As Gerald said, like, I'm from Newfoundland. Our family's still there, a lot of them. We have friends all over the East Coast. So it's just so, like, this week, we should be in Newfoundland. And this Sunday, Mother's Day, we were scheduled to lead worship in the church where I grew up.
Wow.
And like all the layers of that, you know, we haven't been able to be home for Mother's Day for 6 years. We miss a lot of holidays. We haven't been home for Thanksgiving for a decade or so. Like, it's, you know, we miss a lot of holidays. So the fact that we were going to be at the home church for Mother's Day had all this special stuff to it, and it's just so strange not to have that as part of our year. Like, that's part of our rhythm, right? Like, when Easter comes, we're like, okay, Easter's coming, but then we got to get an oil check on the car because we're about to drive for 2 months, and you know, it's a.
And that church too, honey. We did some of our first concerts when we went east at St. Thomas's, because I mean, Hollis had been rector there.
My dad.
35 years ago.
Wow.
You know, like, you go down in the basement and there's this photo of him looking like Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. That's what I think. And it's just, I mean, like, again, and like this church, it's just this gorgeous old church, and you know, that has those resonances,
right?
You know, and you know, we look out and there are generations of people that have known Allison's family, and in different ways. So it's quite the homecoming.
I don't mean to like summarize the obvious here, but I think it is worth saying that you guys genuinely love touring. I think for some people, it is more like that's how what they have to do in order to make a livelihood as a musician. But like, we've talked about this, like, you guys genuinely love touring, and I can hear that that's kind of the first place that you're going to in terms of how you've been impacted is the people that you don't get to see, the roads you don't get to travel, the communities that you don't get to connect with. There's a lot of other impacts beyond the emotional and beyond not being able to do what you love right now. But I think that's interesting that that's like the first thing that feels so consequential.
The first part of losing the tour was the heartbreak of losing the tour, and that terrible, I mean, the decision to cancel it, and we kind of canceled it in parts, and sort of the emotion.
People kept hanging on. Like, the churches kept hanging on, going, well, let's just wait till next week. Let's see, and then it just became the inevitability of it all. But I mean, you know, like, one of the things that we say is that one of the greatest examples of the family of God to us is we can show up at the doorstep of somebody who, in kind of all metrics, is a stranger. But there's no feeling of that.
Right.
There's that sense of knowing, that sense of mutual journey, and we're aching for that right now.
Right.
We're you know, it's to be able to worship with these people, to be able to pray with these people, to be able to hear them where they are. And because it feeds the songs that we create too. And we
see that at Advent Cafe too, like how your connection with the community feeds the creative output as well. I mean, I'm assuming that you guys don't have a crystal ball that you haven't told me about, like, so probably like you don't actually know when like what could be next at this point, and that's gotta be creating some anxiety too.
We have no idea, and this is what's so strange, because you know that I'm a planner, and we share that, and I'm very much a planner. Like, I had this year planned out, sort of mapped out. There was all these stuff like on the calendar, and like I have a vision for what we're going to do for the year and all that's been planned, and I literally have no idea what's coming next.
Right.
And not just what's, so it's one thing because it's like we look ahead, we go, okay, all of our events right now have been canceled right through the summer. And then when will we be able to travel again? That's part of it. But also, like, when can we even just gather again? Like, what do concerts look like in the next 6 months to a year? Like, we sort of have, we're talking about this today, because Gerald and I we're lifelong performers, musicians, singers, all that kind of stuff, right? And so we've basically made our living getting up in front of groups of people our entire lives.
Wow. Yeah.
And now we were like, we don't even know what that looks like in the future.
Yeah.
Like, what do social gatherings, concerts, worship services, we don't even know what those look like going forward.
House concerts.
House concerts,
Yeah.
anything. Like, it's like we bill it with people. Are we going to be able to stay in people's homes?
Right.
I look ahead and I literally have no vision of what our future looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
And that should be very terrifying. And the interesting thing is, I'm a worrier. I'm not as worried.
She's a worrier.
I am. I'm not as worried as I should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that the kind of you and I are kind of striking the same theme here, but the idea that, like, a lot of my fear and worry right now falls on friends of mine who I know aren't Christian and don't have a faith base, because I know that their pragmatic mind is eating holes in them.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk then about the faith component. That's that's an excellent segue into kind of exploring where you are finding that hope right now. And what I was struck by when I was looking at this gospel passage for tonight is something that I try to remind myself of when I'm in times of anxiety or feeling stuck or overwhelmed or whatever, which is that, hindsight can be helpful. Like it's helpful to realize that I've been stuck and overwhelmed before, not in this particular way, but I've been stuck and overwhelmed before, and I can look back and see how God led me through. And what I find interesting, so Jesus in this passage doesn't give the disciples the touchstone that they want. He doesn't assure them that, oh yeah, I'm not going to die, like everything's going to be fine, like victory is ours. Like he doesn't assure them in any of the ways that they want. But what he does do is he keeps bringing them back to that wider picture of how they have already seen God at work. How they've already seen God at work in him, and they can trust that. And they've already seen God at work in the picture of the life of their people, and they can trust in that. Now, I was on Facebook this week, and I noted on your page that you shared a memory of, I think it was 11 years ago this week, being in a very serious car crash. And you've referenced that car crash. I've heard you reference that car crash in your performances before, and we've talked about it off stage before. I know it's had a huge impact on you, and I know it's had a huge impact on you as people of faith as well. Can you just, whether you want to reflect on that experience or other experiences, can you just share a little bit about maybe how God's past faithfulness might be a place that you're drawing on right now?
Well, I think it struck both of us how, because last year was the 10-year anniversary of our accident, and I mean, we could talk quite extensively about it, but just to summarize for people who don't know, we were living in Nashville at the time. We were driving home from church, so the anniversary was a Sunday this week, which is interesting because it was a Sunday. And we were driving our little Toyota Corolla in a tractor trailer, changed lanes and smashed into us, and basically over the course of several miles hit us, dragged us, flipped us upside down.
Not even a normal not even a normal tractor trailer. One that was carrying massive girders to build skyscrapers with. Like it was like we dealt with 4 professional people that day: police, state trooper, EMTs, and doctors, and they all said the exact same thing to us: "You should be dead."
Wow.
So, needless to say, it was a before and after moment in our lives.
Yeah.
And we were still fairly newlyweds at that point. We'd been married a couple of years. And so it's really shaped us.
It gets better, right?
But it really shaped us, like, as a family, I think, too, right? 'Cause it was so formative.
For sure.
And, you know, what followed were, you know, a couple of years of just, like, you know, something like that, it affects you physically and emotionally and spiritually and financially. And we sued the company, so we had a legal battle, which was new for us. So there was all kinds of just enormous struggles. And it's one of those things that when you're in the thick of that journey, you're experiencing one thing. And even in it, we could feel blessings coming. We could feel like our church community came around us right away and loved us. And you know, all this stuff started happening.
They would show up. A different person would show up every night and say, "You don't have to talk to us. You don't like." That was the understanding. We're just going to cook you a meal, and then we're going to leave.
Wow.
And it was Southern cooking, so it was wrong. But like, it's
Within 48 hours, her parents were at our door. You know, like it was incredible. Like, like our car was so destroyed that the tow truck driver, who was in his 50s, he had been a tow truck driver for 25 years, he goes, "I need to know what kind of car that is."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
our exotic Toyota Corolla. Was the identifier.
Yeah.
But you know, it's that thing when you're in something, like we're all in the thick of this now.
Yeah.
And yet I think we're still, a lot of us are very aware of blessings that are happening.
Yes.
Kindnesses that are happening.
The first person on the scene, the first person on the scene, literally about a minute after the accident finally ended, we're upside down. We'd been caught by a tree before we went into a wall. And this man peeks his head and he goes, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a paramedic from New Orleans in Nashville on my holidays, and I just want to ask you a few questions." So like there was a paramedic there within a minute of us, and he just had us wiggle our toes, had us wiggle our fingers, and then helped get us out of the car.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, it's awesome too, like I love that moment.
Yeah.
Is that in the moment you can start to feel blessings happening, but then there's the long journey too, right? And you view things differently. And you know, that accident and the healing of it and the process of it has really shaped us in a lot of ways. And to be reminded of it now in this season that should be filled with so much fear and so much worry and so much anxiety, and in many ways is. But I look at that and I go, God brought us through that. And he didn't just bring us through it in the survival sense. He healed us and he allowed us to grow in ways. And we had relationships that got better through moving through that struggle together. Like our relationship grew. We had really great friends at the time, Tara and Kyle. You've met Tara.
Yeah.
And they were the first people who came and picked us up on the scene. And we shared in that experience and sharing in that struggle together, our friendship grew. And I can see that happening now in this situation that we are all in. Even though we're social distancing, we are somehow still socially connecting and able to build relationships. And I think it's so powerful because all of us have experienced something in our life that was a turning point, that was a difficulty, struggle. And
That we were one person before it happened, and another person
and
after it
I think
happened.
if we can all take a minute in this season and think back on that time and go, okay, God brought me through that.
Yeah.
God somehow blessed me through it. I hope people feel that. And that because of that, we can trust that God will do it again. that God is working in this season, even though that can be difficult and complicated to feel sometimes. God is still moving through it with love and generosity and peace, and those gifts are all available for us.
Yeah, I do think about this often, how we build the muscles of faith, how we train our eyes to see, right? And being able to look back, even if you couldn't see it all at the time, being able to look back, I think, does help to train our eyes to see in the present time as well, and to be able to receive that peace that passes all understanding. So, that kind of brings us full circle to this moment and into the certainty that Jesus does offer the disciples. It's not what they're looking for, but Jesus does have incredibly reassuring, profoundly reassuring words for them.
Yes.
Words that are actually among some of the best known pieces of scripture that we have. Like we often turn to parts of this passage at times of great loss and great heartbreak, because there is something profound that Jesus offers his disciples in order to go forward here. What he tells them, again, in one of these verses that's really quite famous, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And that word "way" I find really interesting, because it could also be translated as road. I am the road. I am the road of truth and life. Sometimes just hearing a verse that's so well known, just tweaked in a slightly different direction, I think sometimes allows me to hear something fresh in
That's
it.
why reading multiple translations is such a great thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. So, so Jesus tells us that he himself is this road of truth and life. And so although everything is gonna fall apart in some pretty significant ways, and it is a time of darkness and loss, and there are way more questions than answers, Jesus is inviting them to find their foundation in this relationship of love that is going to be this sure and certain road of truth and life. Whatever else might happen on the road and wherever that road might take them, that there's this relationship of love that they can trust in. I think that you've begun to touch on this, reflecting from the car accident experience to the present time, but where are you experiencing Jesus as the road of life right now? Where are you experiencing God's guidance or faithfulness or love? What are those faith touchstones for you? And I mean, Gerald, you kind of named it right at the outset of this conversation, that how important is it to us right now to have that word of faith speaking into our lives against that, what was it you said, kind of the endless pragmatism? Is that what you said?
That chews away at
that chews away at you.
Yeah.
So,
it's interesting because the song that we're going to do later is a song called it's called Tabla Rasa, which the idea of the empty slate, because we look at the calendar and it's empty. It's completely empty right now, and that's on some level, again, in a pragmatic sense, that's terrifying. But in a broader sense, so I started kind of feeling, what does that mean in a broader sense? Tabla rasa, being a blank slate. And I returned. I haven't been studying for a while, studying scripture, and I've returned to it now, and it's just. It's and I'm just kind of feeling the momentum of that. I've lost 25 pounds, right? And I'm hoping to lose significantly more before we get back on the road. But I feel like something like this is a moment in time where new better habits can be sown, where new versions of ourselves can emerge out of the darkness and the dust, because we get closer in moments like this to God. We do. We get we are more prone to look up in moments like this, and we're less distracted by some of the inanities of the modern world and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love too that you chose the word "the road," because we should be on the road.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I thought that was kind of an interesting metaphor.
I love that, but it's interesting.
And we love driving, like even just
I love being on the road.
listening to music and.
But it's interesting. This will just take me a second to get to how the metaphor works for me. But so as we started to cancel the tour and let people know and reveal our situation, which is that our livelihood has been decimated and everything we do is non-existent, and we really reached out to our community. So we have a mailing list and Facebook people and a lot of friends, and so we let people know what we were going through, and we had so much support come back to us. Even people just writing and saying, "I am just praying for you right now," and the notes and words that we received were so humbling and so overwhelming. I said to Gerald, I feel so encouraged in our mission. We can't actually go out and do what we do, and yet I feel almost a revival of our calling in this season. And that's a very strange place to be, where it's like, because I can feel, just sometimes you do your work and you don't know if it's affecting anything, and suddenly you receive this beautiful confirmation that what you do is valued and making a difference in people's lives.
Sometimes the ripple comes back.
But that ripple comes back, and I'm in that weird place where I'm like, I feel totally revived and reinvigorated. Like what we do matters, and it's reaching people, and it's valuable, and it's needed, and I can't do it. Can't do it. And
in the traditional sense, we can't do it.
And my job in our duo is management and getting bookings and getting us out there, and I can't do it. And I'm in that weird place with it. But the road is interesting to me because I look ahead on the road and I can't see it. It's foggy.
Right.
I have no vision of what it's going to be. And my prayer has become, God, you've given us this calling. I trust in it.
Yeah.
I trust that you've prepared something for us, that you know what it is. So God, when you're ready for me to take the next step, show me what it is.
Yeah.
And that is literally my prayer these days, because we're traveling blind right now, as many of us are in society, because we don't
As
know,
the disciples were in that moment.
What the new normal is going to be.
Yeah.
But just my prayer has become, God, just when you're ready for us to take the next step, show us, because we trust that you know where we're going.
Yeah.
And like the disciples in that moment, we've been given everything we need.
Yeah.
We don't have everything we want. We don't have a kind of concrete visions of what the future is going to look like.
Yeah.
But we've been given everything we need right now, and that's, I think that has to all, as we gather together, even in a virtual sense like tonight, and give each other comfort, knowing that we're all kind of struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better word to end on. I think that just allows us to connect our own personal situations with the very personal stories that you've just shared, and to know that we're all part of that bigger story that we can trust in, and that we can find that certainty within all of the fog, within all of the unknowns. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.